President Trump is reinforcing protections for prayer in schools. The White House also planning to streamline the federal complaint process for students to alert authorities of discrimination. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us with that story. Ben?
Well, Jenna, today's White House action is an attempt to clear up misunderstandings about what is and what isn't allowed when it comes to religious expression in public schools. The Oval Office announcement also aims to help empower students wanting to pray in schools.
This afternoon, we're proudly announcing historic steps to protect the First Amendment right to pray in public schools.
President Trump is using the federal pulpit to fight for religious rights. The Education Department is sending letters to officials in all 50 states to ensure students and teachers don't face discrimination for practicing their right of religious freedom.
We're going to be making it clear that students have the right to pray publicly in school if they so choose.
The event shoring up support among evangelical Christians ahead of the 2020 election. Franklin Graham tweeted, "Thank you, President Trump, for protecting and empowering the right to student-led prayer in schools." A new Quinnipiac poll revealed 77% of white evangelical voters approved President Trump's job performance. Domestic Policy Director Joe Grogan pointing out the action covers the entire religious spectrum.
President Trump is proud to draw attention to this matter and use his megaphone to remind people of this and elevate kids who want to participate in their faith. They shouldn't feel ashamed or bashful about it if they want to pray, if they want to read the Bible or the Quran.
In 1962, the Supreme Court banned public school-sponsored prayer while allowing students to privately meet and pray on school grounds.
Federal agencies need to make sure that when they send grant money to states and those states distribute money, that those states do not take in the religious nature of the institutions, the potential grantees, and discriminate against them.
Due to cases where the law is misunderstood, today's announcement reinforces what's on the books.
To remind the chief education officers in all 50 states that students have the right to pray at their own direction, to gather at their own direction, to bring the Bible to school if they choose to bring the Quran or the Torah in.
Now, the White House also wanted to point out that public schools risk losing federal funds if they do in fact violate students' rights to religious expression. Jenna?
All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House, thank you. And here with us now is CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody. David, you were there in the Oval Office today. Tell us what that was like.
Yeah, always neat to be in the Oval Office. It's kind of cool. But beyond that, sorry, didn't mean to geek out for a moment. But basically, what was interesting is the stories that were really behind the Resolute desk there in the Oval Office. Not just coming from evangelicals, but Jews and Muslims. And one very passionate and very emotional story by a Jewish high schooler who had a swastika painted on some of her high school equipment there at school. So it was a pretty moving experience, especially by some of the stories we heard today.
And you had an opportunity to ask the president a question, right?
Right. Asked him whether or not he believes there's a culture war taking place. And he said, and I have to tell you, Jen, I think this is the first time we've heard him say this. He said, yes, there is a cultural war going on in America. I don't really think he's ever said it like that before, at least. And then he went on to explain a little bit more why. And he said, we haven't seen things things that are going on now we haven't seen in the history of our country in terms of the social issues that are going on that many people of faith are very concerned about.
President Trump has made this a signature issue of his administration. Can you expand a little bit more on his support for religious freedom?
Well, sure. I mean, there's so many different, everything from the UN, that big UN religious freedom meeting that he held. It was the first of its kind, John. And then you have the religious ministerials at the State Department. You also have actual action, the DOJ going into court and putting the weight of the federal government behind cake bakers who want to have that right to bake a cake without their religious liberty being infringed upon. And also the Obamacare contraception mandate. I mean, that was a big deal as well in terms of letting folks that have a problem with the contraception mandate be able to opt out.
And where do you think this is coming from? Is the president pushing this, or is this coming from Vice President Pence or Mike Pompeo?
That's a really good question. So I think if you just look at it as a diagram, I think this is like the nerve center of Trump kind of DNA, like a logical thing. He doesn't really see it in faith terms as much as he sees it like this is like stupid, you know? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And then you have the Pence and the Pompeo and others kind of filling in the evangelical and faith dots around him.
David, how were the president's spirits today amid all of this impeachment stuff that was happening at the same time on Capitol Hill?
Very serious. I walked in, he looked somber. I don't know if somber is the right word. More serious, I think, is really the right word. And, you know, I have to tell you, I mean, who can blame him when you're getting served impeachment articles on a silver platter? And literally, when I say silver platter, that's what it looked like, you know, when the Sergeant of Arms was bringing those into the House. Right. You know, we'll see who has the last laugh here. The White House thinks they will. November, voters will decide it.
All right. David, great reporting.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.